Hello, today I am making a presentation about the Global Common Case Study, Antarctica, in AQA A-Level Geography, in the topic Globalization and Global Governance. There you go. I was trying to use the arrow. Okay, so I want to first talk about what's exactly in the specification. So here it's talking about everything that you need to know when going into the exam, but most notably, it states here that your case study has to be about Antarctica. So everyone who's doing AQA level geography will be learning about Antarctica. So you need to know this case study because they will ask specific questions, as you'll see at the end, about Antarctica. Here's just some things here with like the United Nations and the International Whaling Commission and the Antarctic Treaty, and we will go on to that in a minute. Okay, so the topography in Antarctica. So 98% of it is in ice, the rest is just rock. Um, so the mountains can reach 4.8 kilometers. Coldest, it's one of the coldest, driest, and windiest continents. And in terms of cold, the average temperature is -50 degrees Celsius, and the lowest can reach to -86, which is very cold. There's around only 50 millimeters of rain every year. The average wind speed is about 50 miles per hour, but can reach to 200, which is extremely fast. If you're caught in that, you will not survive. So there are in around the Southern Ocean and Antarctica and all that, there are areas of mixing and upwelling currents with high marine activity, and these upwelling currents support phytoplankton, which provide food for example, Antarctic krill, which we will get onto. The east ice sheet, so this side, is larger and thicker and much older, and the sea ice is actually expanding. In 2014, it was said to have around 20 million meters squared. So the Arctic Peninsula, which is where this box is here, which is on the west ice sheet. So the Antarctic circumpolar currents are warming more rapidly than global oceans due to its sensitivity to small rises in temperature. Then there was a 3 degrees Celsius increase in the last 50 years. Overall, the west ice sheet is thinning, and the Southern Ocean temperatures have increased by 1 degree Celsius since 1995. So one of the threats to Antarctica is whaling. So I think before we mentioned the timeline, some of the reasons for why whaling happen is because of its high profitability and the high profitable business for meat extraction and blubber, where this blubber would be created into whale oil, which could be used in many things such as lubricating machinery, oil lamps, food, and insulation. So a lot of things. It's not a surprise that people would want to whale, but obviously there are a lot of negative impacts in doing so, such as a decrease in biodiversity and ruining the food web. So, uh, whaling began in the 19th century, and by the 1960s, the whale population had decreased by 90%, um, because whalers, basically countries who did whaling, such as Russia and Japan, were exploiting the Southern Ocean for krill and whales, and there began to be concerns. So to counter this exploitation, the IWC, or the International Whaling Commission, began protecting whales in the Southern Ocean. The IWC created the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, which banned whaling for certain perimeters of the Southern Ocean. Something very interesting that happened is that Japan evaded the moratorium, and they found a loophole in the IWC where, in the conditions of the IWC, they allowed whaling for scientific research, where actually what Japan was doing was measuring the stocks of whales in order to remove the sanctuary, essentially lobbying for commercial whaling. But in 2014, Japan was judged for doing this research as a cover for commercial whaling, and had been banned from doing so. So, more threats to Antarctica, global warming. So, ocean acidification. So, there's a decline in pH of ocean water due to the increase of CO2, which creates carbonic acid, which means that the oceans are less alkaline. Oceans can become more corrosive to unprotected shells, which can cause a disruption in the food web if these species are becoming extinct because of the ocean acidification. So in terms of the topography, on the west side, um, it is accumulating a small amount of land ice, increasing in the ice. And in the west, it's losing both land and ice, which is impacting on the wildlife living on the ice sheet. So talk about krill being threatened. So in terms of fishing, ships dump waste, e.g. plastic, which contaminate water, and the fish eat the plastic, which can get passed through um, the food chain and can kill a lot of species of fish. And also bycatching and direct destruction of marine habitats by ships and fishing gear is also pretty negative. So in terms of krill, they are processed for feed for fish farms, but also for krill oil, which interestingly, 100 capsules cost £40, which is wild. But that's mainly because it becomes more expensive when more restrictions are put on in terms for fishing, because it's very negative, of course. So in the long term, there's a decline in krill biomass. So there's also the threat about mineral resources. So in Antarctica, there's never been any commercial mining. It was banned by the Antarctic Treaty, or AT, through the Madrid Protocol, which is actually called the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, but that's a pretty long name. So it aims to protect the Antarctic environment and ecosystems. Went in effect in 1998. On the image it says 1991, but that's it says the signing of the protocol. It actually went in effect a couple of years after. The main issue with this whole protocol is that the next review is in 2048, and after then there may be a review done and modified to the increasing demand for mining. So technically, mining is not out of the picture yet, but for now, at least in 2024, it is still illegal. So the Antarctic Treaty stands for Antarctica being used for peaceful purposes and military activity is banned. It promotes international scientific cooperation, for example, exchanging of research results and personnel, so they can reduce the amount of impact done on Antarctica, and they do this by sharing a couple different countries just sharing the same results. So some issues with the governance is that pro-conservation claimants, for example, Australia, are concerned that countries like China and Russia are increasing their territorial claim. In 2009, China established a third research station, proposed a code of conduct there. Other parties were concerned about potential limits on their own scientific activities. So, in the Antarctic Treaty, um, or in the ATS, there are a lot of people, a lot of countries who essentially they're not. The one country doesn't govern Antarctica because it is a global common. So many countries come together to sort of say what happens in what the Antarctic Treaty does. So in terms of territorial claim, the Antarctic Treaty has not rejected any existing claims, but prohibits their assertion as well as establishment for new claims. The USA and Russia also remain the right to lay claims. To meet the UNEP, or the United Nations Environmental Protection Biodiversity Goals, in the next 10 years, there are attempts to establish additional MPAs, which are marine protection areas, that are likely to lead to disagreements between the ATS, which stands for the Antarctic Treaty System, members who want to extend marine protection, and those countries, for example China and Russia, who want greater access to fisheries. You can guess probably why. Okay. So, NGOs, or non-governmental organizations in Antarctica. So we have the ACOS, which is over 20 NGOs which are interested in protecting Antarctic environments. For example, Greenpeace and the WWF. They pursue their own individual organizational Antarctic work, and is the only NGO group that dedicates all its time to Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, and only environmental NGOs with official status at Antarctic governance meetings. Then there's the IUCN, which is an organization that includes the government and the NGOs. They are a respected knowledge-based coalition on expert groups. They offer expertise, but not a decision maker, and are invited in like expert status in the meetings, the ATCM, Antarctic Treaty Consultative meetings, and is the first NGO to gain formal observer status on these meetings. So tourism in Antarctica. So some negative impacts are walking in the same routes that can create scars or paths. Tourist seasons coincide with peak breeding seasons for most species. An example we can use are terns. Terns' peak breeding season is between March and November. Some terns can abandon their nests or can migrate to different areas because of the disruption. Okay. So also some negative impacts would be accidentally importing some alien species, for example, insects, seeds on boots or clothes, and oil spills from ships and boats as they travel to Antarctica. Some mitigation strategies implemented are from the IAATO, which is the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators, is that it's a well-governed industry with strict rules and a good record of environmental concerns. Their regulations are widely accepted by tour operators and tourists. These tourists even becoming ambassadors for protecting Antarctica's ecosystem. There's this research from Scott Polar saying that seals and penguins seem to be resilient and have adapted to the presence of humans on land. This institute found that tourism has a minimal overall effect or impact. You can use that as a sort of counter to the negative impacts if a question like that ever comes up. So some restrictions that are posed by the IAATO is that no large ships with more than 500 passengers are allowed to visit every 3 or 4 days. When landing, groups must be divided into boatloads of 20 people with qualified guides. In the 1950s, this is sort of a perspective, don't really know why it's under this bracket, but in 1950s there were maybe a few hundred people going to Antarctica, and in 2018-19 there was around 56,000 people, which just shows that the market, you could say, for tourism in Antarctica is rising and becoming a larger issue due to more people meeting a more exacerbated negative impacts for tourism. So here is the end of the presentation. Here I just want to show some questions, some past exam questions that have been. So if you want to write them down maybe or try them. Here is for the second question. Here's the insert for it. You can just flip back if you'd like to. And here are some 20 markers. And surprisingly, there was a question about NGOs in Antarctica. So even though it seems like a very irrelevant thing, you could be asked about it. And that is all. Thank you very much.